Right, good morning everyone. My name is Jonathan Ball, I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Horsham District Local Plan 2023 to 2040. The hearing sessions that are taking place this week are part of that examination. Now, can everybody hear me all right? Even at the back, good. There are a couple of housekeeping points first before anything else. Can you make sure all your phones are switched to silent or switched off? And can the council let us know about fire escape and facilities?
Yes, good morning everybody. My name is Catherine Howe, Head of Strategic Planning, and welcome to Albury House. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, obviously I think most of you are aware this is new offices, so please make sure that you're only consuming water in this room, no hot food or no food or hot drinks in the council chamber. Fire safety, please be aware that there are no fire drills planned during the hearing session, so if you do hear an alarm, you will need to evacuate the building nearest the fire exits, which are behind me as indicated. And please follow one of the officers to the fire assembly point, which is outside the benches at the Wetherspoons pub opposite the building, until we are told we can return. Toilet breaks, comfort breaks. Toilets are located on the landing by the stairs that you will have come up on. And in terms of microphones, when you are speaking, you will need to press the silver button in front of you to speak, and then obviously turn it off when you are finished. And please make sure that you do have them off during breaks, just to prolong battery life. And then just finally, visitor passes. Please keep your visitor passes visible at all times. You can take them with you if you need to leave the building at lunchtime, and just show your pass to reception when re-entering the building. But please return them at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Howe. Did everybody hear that? You're okay? All right, excellent. Now let's do some introductions. So I'll go around and get those who are going to participate today to introduce themselves. But first of all, I want to introduce the programme officer and, sorry, we have two programme officers. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Good morning, my name is Kerry Truman, I'm the Programme Officer, and to my left is my colleague Ian Bussey, who is also a Programme Officer.
Thank you. Now, can the council's representatives introduce themselves, please?
So, very good morning to you. My name is Paul Shadarevian, KC, acting for the council.
Catherine Howe, Head of Strategic Planning.
Julia Hayes, Strategic Planning Officer.
Tal Kleiman, Principal Planner.
I'm Ruth Fletcher. I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning and Infrastructure at Horsham District Council.
Thank you. Now I will go, I think, from that side of the room to that side of the room. It's going to be quite difficult. Let's do sort of second row, then third row, then I don't know how far back it goes. All right, so we'll start with you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Paul Korniski. I'm a resident of Horsham Parish, Horsham District, I should say, for the last 45 years. Thank you.
Fenella Maitland-Smith. I'm a Rusper Parish Councillor, but I'm also Chair of the Save West of Ifield campaign.
Thank you.
I'm George Sallows. I'm Chair of Planning on Rusper Parish Council, representing Rusper Parish Council.
Good morning, Sean Bashforth from Quad, representing Our Place Sustainable Developments.
Right. Now, I think this row behind the council is also council, is it? Yes. All right. So now we're going over to this side. So, I can't even see your name, Mr. Somerville.
Yeah. Good morning, sir. Andrew Somerville, Nexus Planning on behalf of Crowd Ace Homes.
Ryan Johnson, representing Highwood's interests at Billingshurst.
Morning, sir. Mark Barrett from the Home Builders Federation.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the next row. Now, this is going to be a little difficult for me because normally I can see everybody's nameplates, but I can't. All right. So I'm just thinking about how this is going to work when you want to come to speak. I think you're going to have to do that. Flag your put your names up. Anyway, let's move on to you.
Thank you, sir. I'm Jane Piper from Lucid Planning, representing Taylor Wimpey.
Good morning, Katie Lamb from Stratton Parker, representing Reside Holdings.
And then,
good morning, Inspector. My name is Gemma Ackerman of Blue Fox Planning, representing Richborough, who have interests in Billingshurst.
Good morning, sir. David Murray Cox on behalf of A2 Dominion.
Good morning, Philip Allen of Boyer. We're representing Waits Developments.
Good morning, sir. George Mackenzie, barrister from Landmark Chambers, representing Sacrum Homes.
Morning, sir. Long time no see. Andrew Marsh, Mid Sussex District Council.
Good morning, Anthony Masson, Crawley Borough Council.
right, now is that as far as it goes back? Nobody lurking in the far depths, is there? All right. Is the press present? It's a matter of interest. No. All right. Right. So before we get to the hearings themselves, there are a few explanations. It's important that we're all referring to the same version of the plan. So the examination will be considering the submission version of the Horsham District Local Plan 2023 to 2040, which was the document that was submitted for examination on 26th of July 2024. Under the implementation arrangements in the December 2023 and December 2024 versions of the NPPF, the plan will be examined under the framework that was relevant at the time the plan reached its Regulation 19 stage. That's the September 2023 version of the framework. And that includes the use of the standard method of calculating the housing requirement that was in place at that time. But of course, we do need to have regard to the future and potentially to the policies in the emerging framework. Since once adopted, those policies will form the development management framework within which planning applications will, it'll be an important material consideration for planning applications. So the examination will look at the legal compliance and soundness of the plan. As regards legal compliance, I consider that this has been fully evidenced, and I don't intend to hold hearings into legal compliance. As regards soundness, paragraph 35 of the September 2023 NPPF sets out the tests of soundness. So the plan should be positively prepared, justified, effective, and consistent with national policy. I say that, I know that you on the objector side there have sought to unpick national policy in relation to the calculation of the housing requirement. But of course, I'm looking at things in accordance with national policy itself. And the other point I want to make here is that I can only support main modifications to the plan if they're required for legal compliance and soundness. It's not just simply a question of if you think you've got some nice to have wording to make the plan better. It's not that at all. It's to do with whether the plan needs to be made sound and what that wording needs to be. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of the hearings themselves. The hearings are only part of the examination process. So what you're seeing, and those of you who are not familiar with this process, what you're seeing in effect is the tip of the iceberg here, because much of the work is undertaken in writing. I've read all the relevant documents and the written material and evidence has given me a lot of information already. So the hearings are going to be selective and will simply focus on the matters that I want to hear more about. I've sent my written comments on the plan's development management policies to the council already, and you can find that on the website. This explains why the hearing agendas do not include discussion on a number of the plan's policies. So you will be aware of the background to this examination. The submitted plan didn't identify sufficient housing sites to meet the district's needs, owing to Natural England's requirement for water neutrality. That requirement has been lifted, and there's now an opportunity to identify sufficient land to meet the district's housing needs and to accommodate an amount of unmet need from neighbouring authorities. This is likely to require the identification of additional housing sites. So this week's hearings will only cover the headline housing matters, such as the housing requirement, housing supply, affordable housing, and homes for special groups and business needs. So by the time we reach the end of this initial week, the council should be clear about what modifications are required as regards the headline housing numbers, and also potentially business as well, and specialist groups. So I'm looking at here, we're going to explore that today. Once the council has carried out the necessary work, they'll produce a draft schedule of main modifications, which is likely to include additional sites as well as modifications to the plan's policies. Main modifications, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, are changes to the plan that are required to make it sound. The main modifications will then be listed in a schedule which will be put on the website, and further public consultation will take place on those modifications. Following that, I'll consider the responses to the consultation, and if necessary, I will hold further hearings. At the moment, there's potential for further hearings in relation to the spatial strategy, site selection, and probably a small number of the housing allocations, although I shall aim to deal with as much as I can in writing, including most of the smaller site allocations. And if you've been following what I did in Mid-Sussex, that's the approach I took there as well. So the big allocations, the most controversial allocations, I held hearings in relation to, but the smaller ones I've dealt with in writing. So after the consultation period on the main modifications has finished and I've considered the responses, in due course I'll write a report to Horsham District Council. This report will recommend main modifications that are required to make the plan sound. The council will normally adopt them, and in fact if they don't, the plan won't be sound and can't be adopted. So let's move on to talk about this week's hearings. So today we're going to talk about Horsham District's housing requirement. That's the number of homes required to be provided during the plan period. This is the bottom line, what you have to actually provide. This comprises local housing need together with an appropriate number of additional homes to respond to the declared unmet need of neighbouring authorities, and possibly also to adjust to identified needs from certain sectors such as affordable housing, but we'll have that discussion in due course. So that's today. Tomorrow I want to talk about housing supply. So it's all very well identifying a bottom line housing requirement figure, but actually there's the big issue of how that would be supplied, how the plan might maintain a rolling 5-year supply of housing land, and how much contingency, how much headroom is required to make sure that the housing requirement is delivered. And all of that is, a lot of that is going to be the art of the possible in this case, because of the history of this plan and the recent history of water neutrality. So we will look at that in due course. That's tomorrow. On Thursday, I'll look at the plan's ability to deliver homes for all the community, and then I'll look at the plan's provisions for meeting business and industrial needs. And on Friday, we will have there'll be a programming meeting, which will be with Horsham and Mid-Sussex councils, because the two are running broadly in parallel. Mid-Sussex a little bit ahead, but obviously because I'm doing both, the timing of the future work is critical, the timing of hearings and so on. So that's Friday. I've carried out some unaccompanied site visits already. I'm going to have to do quite a few more. They'll be unaccompanied during the course of the examination. So now, does everybody have a copy of the agenda for today and for this week? Good. So I'd like to thank the council and all the participants for the evidence you've submitted, the topic papers and the hearing statements. I'll just say something about the way the hearings will work. So first of all, today I'll give the council's representatives the opportunity, it'll be Councillor Fletcher, the opportunity of speaking for a few minutes to identify or to introduce the plan and background to it. and then I'll move on to the agenda items. I'll go through each point on the agenda and invite people to contribute to the discussion. I might not stick to the agenda in that order because a lot of these things are very linked. So but I'll lead the hearing and ask the questions. The responses should be directed to me. And the purpose for me is to gain the information I need. If you want to speak, I was going to say please stand your nameplate up, but the chances I still won't see you, so you might have to do that if your arm can stand it. And as long as I can see that you want to speak, that's fine. But there are a lot of issues to consider, so please can you make your contributions brief and focused. You won't need to repeat your whole case to me in detail or give any sort of formal presentation. There won't be any need to repeat points that have been made by somebody else. So, and if necessary, if there's a lot of repetition, I intervene to stop it. I might only go around the table once on each question unless it's necessary to explore something, but we'll see. So please say what you have to say at the right time. There won't be any cross-examination or cross-table discussion. I'll terminate discussion when I've heard enough, but I will give the council
No, it's not.
Have I spoken for too long? I'm back. Yeah, all right. Thank you. So I'll give the council the opportunity of summing up their position at the end of each question. I will, you might not be used to this, I will occasionally Hello, yeah, that's working. Have we a problem? Thank you.
Carry on.
All right. We'll struggle on. So I'm going to express views and conclusions as we go through the hearings. So if there are any problems in terms of soundness, if a modification is needed, or if further work is required to make the plan sound, I will say so, preferably in the hearings themselves. And I'll follow that up at the end of this week with a letter to the council, which will go on the website. And finally, as regards the daily routine, I'll have a coffee break at about 11:20 to 11:30-ish, an hour's lunch break at about 1, afternoon tea break, if we're still going by then, at around 3:30. And no way we're going to go later than 5, but it's unlikely we'll ever get that far anyway. But I'll make changes as we go along, depending on progress and people's availability. Are there any questions at this stage about how the hearings will run? Good, all right. Then, before we move on to matter one proper, I'd like to offer the council opportunity to make a brief opening statement. So, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to make an opening statement. My name is Ruth Fletcher and I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning and Infrastructure at Horsham District Council. Whether you are here in person, will be attending later sessions or listening remotely, I would like to welcome you all to Horsham District. I would like to thank the Inspector for taking on the continued examination of our plan and for your very considerable work to this date. Horsham District is a genuinely good place to live and work. We live in the beautiful Sussex countryside with thriving towns and villages, each with their own individual history and character. We are proud of where we live and there is a strong sense of community. You only need to visit our Friday lates events in the summer to see this in action. Horsham is a growing and successful district which has had an excellent record of plan-led delivery under the current Horsham District Planning Framework, but this is increasingly out of date. There is a need for more housing, especially for genuinely affordable housing for our younger generations and for local and lower paid workers. However, this requirement must be balanced against the need to protect the character of our district so that we don't lose what we all value so highly. As you'll be well aware, the path to get to this point, since preparation of the plan started back in 2018, has been long and especially difficult. Getting local support and buy-in for new development is always challenging, where meeting the national targets means there will be significant greenfield development. In our case, this has been compounded by the legacy of past developments, which have not always brought the supporting infrastructure that was promised. What we hear time and time again from our residents is that we must not have more housing without the schools, healthcare and transport needed for the rise in the population. A further challenge to the preparation of this plan has been the issue of water neutrality. Natural England's position statement in September 2021 suddenly meant that we were simultaneously required to continue delivering our housing target, but were legally prevented from permitting most new development for a period of 4 years. This also led to delays in the preparation and examination of this plan. This has had major consequences for the council, our residents, and for our local construction industry. And during this whole period, additional work has been needed to accommodate the multiple changes to planning rules that have taken place. The result is that we have been left with an increasingly out-of-date plan operating under the tilted balance. We are seeing an increased number of speculative applications for unallocated and less sustainable sites than those in our plan, adversely impacting local infrastructure provision and our countryside and environment. Local communities have been understandably angry and frustrated at the lack of certainty about future development in their areas and have real concerns about the impact this will have on their day-to-day lives. The council's time and resource that should be used to support positive development has had to be spent managing applications and appeals in isolated locations that do not deliver the quality, the schools, the transport links, and the affordable housing that we need. Developers have suffered from being unable to progress with work on allocated sites and lacking future certainty about future sites. All this means that we are determined to get HDC back to plan-led development and out of the tilted balance as soon as possible. When we took office in 2023, this was our top priority, and this remains the case today. The housing numbers in our initial plan submitted reflected the ongoing constraints of water neutrality at that time. In the work we have done since then, we are addressing the increased housing requirement and reflecting the transition as we gradually recover from the impact of water neutrality. We welcome this examination to bring certainty over the council's housing requirement, and we expect that this will lead to further decisions being made about additional housing allocations. We welcome the opportunity to air the opportunities and challenges that this will bring in an open, fair and constructive manner. However, I cannot overstate the extent to which this will continue to be a challenge for local communities facing large allocations in their areas. But without meeting this challenge, we would continue under the tilted balance with all the consequences of large-scale permissions in less sustainable locations and little certainty that these will even be successful developments that deliver in the time frames needed. The new development that this plan will bring will help shape our community for generations. It is therefore absolutely imperative that the development which does come forward in the plan is of the highest possible quality, that it is genuinely deliverable and comes with early delivery of infrastructure, that it brings higher levels of affordable housing, that it protects our environment, our green spaces, and that it respects and enhances the character of our towns and villages. I would welcome ongoing and constructive dialogue with the development industry and communities to ensure that this becomes a reality. Getting this far has been difficult for our officers and difficult personally for councillors, especially those with large housing allocations in their own wards. I want to give continued thanks to the council officers throughout the organisation who have worked so hard to bring this plan to fruition, and especially to the officers in strategic planning and our director. I want to thank my predecessors in this role, especially John Milne, who picked up the local plan from the previous administration and quickly brought it to submission, and who has continued to support our determination to complete the job. I want to recognise the excellent work that so many parish councillors and clerks have put in to develop neighbourhood plans, which are so important, also a very challenging task. And finally, I want to extend my thanks to the many residents who have contributed throughout this plan process and will no doubt continue to do so as this examination progresses. I have no doubt officers will assist you in responding to your questions over the course of the examination process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. I'd just like to say in response, I fully appreciate the difficulties that the council has faced over the last few years in terms of the water neutrality issue. I don't know whether I should say this or not, but the lack of coordination in tying that in with national policy on the delivery of housing. I'm fully aware of this. But what I'm trying to do here, obviously now, is to make sure that you have going forward a sound plan. So today's discussion is obviously the first building block, I suppose, in constructing that. So what I want to do now is actually, I want to ask the council, I don't know if it would be you, Ms. Howe, or who it would be, just to give us a flavour of how you see this plan, which is obviously running frightfully late, tying in with work that you are, through the regs, are going to have to do on a new plan, and how you, where you see the role of this one in relation to the forthcoming one. Obviously, the regs are couched in terms of 80% of the plan as submitted, which is different from what the draft NPPF said originally, which is the plan to be adopted. So you have a plan as submitted, which I think is something like 78% of the current LHN. How do you see the programme of work going forward, and how do you see any housing requirement that's established through this plan translating into what you will have to do in the future?
Yes, certainly, sir. So I think just to sort of begin where we are with the regulations is that we are required to commence the new plan by the 30th of June this year under the regulations. We are doing that. But I think this plan inevitably obviously will set the foundation for that conversation and be a building block in terms of, we know that this plan, obviously, whilst it will have a plan period, we know that by the sort of last 5 to 10 years, 5 years of that plan, clearly we are going to need additional housing sites. We also have the context of local government reform. So by the time that we get potentially beyond that stage, we will become a different authority, certainly by adoption. There are still inherent uncertainties within precise timings, the geographies of that, but nevertheless we already have close working relationships with Crawley, Mid Sussex, and potentially Chichester as well, which we picked up through water neutrality. So I think we have that basis on which to build.
Yes, so just taking that a little bit further, we know what the current December 2024 LHN is, local housing need figure is, I'm interested to know how you see any figure coming out of this process tying in with the LHN figure that you will have to use for the forthcoming plan.
Yeah, Lovely. So, I think where we have, if you turn to our topic paper, I think it's paragraph 17 is sort of fairly pertinent there. And what we are indicating is that in the latter sort of years of the plan, we are already promoting a build-out rate of 1,390. The current standard housing methodology is 1,322. So we're looking to meet that, potentially slightly exceed that. So that is obviously the starting point. Clearly, once we get beyond that, we can have a further conversation with our partners around, what additional development may well be required.
All right. Now, I've read a range of different views on things like the plan period, the 80% business. The 80%, I think, is a bit of a red herring for this examination. It's obviously relevant to the council, but that it's relevant in terms of the preparation of the next plan. The plan period, however, a number of people have raised, and if you have raised that, you will probably be aware of the conversation I've had, similar conversation I had with Mid Sussex Council, where there were suggestions that because government or national policy is that you should have 15 years from adoption, the back end of the plan period should be rolled forward, and I'm aware of that. But because we're in unusual circumstances here, and because we have Crawley's plan and potentially Mid Sussex's plan terminating 2040, my initial view anyway is that this plan also ought to terminate in 2040 as originally set up. So unless there are really strong reasons not to, we will have a subsequent plan anyway. So I'm not sure that the rolling forward of this plan period is of particular significance. But there may be people who want to talk to that. But that's my initial view on that particular point. What I want to get to today is using the plan period up to 2040 is a clear idea of what the dwellings per annum figures should be over the plan period. And I think that they do change because, first of all, we've got an initial 3 years of very, very low completions. Then we've got a step-up period. And then we've got a recovery period where you potentially are able to make allocations to recover the shortfall. And what I want to do is try to identify where those steps come and what the figures should be that slot into them. I've done a little bit of homework, which I'm sure if you're marking it, you put red all over it. But it's just looking at how this rolls forward. Now, you've got 890 is your LHN for year one, 896 for year two, 819 for year three. Now, in Mid Sussex, I agreed that they could accept the most recent figure. I'm inclined to take that starting point again here, notwithstanding the views that people have said, partly for consistency, partly because it is the latest figure. But we have, on top of that, an unmet need in Crawley, which I've annualised at, and I might be wrong about this, 185 for the first 10 years. That's half of Crawley's unmet need, and 273 for years 11 to 17. I'm just putting this out there because their need steps up according to their representation. Then there's the question of the South Coast. And then there's a question, and we'll come to this tomorrow probably, of how much resilience you also need to build in. Now, I'm going to stop there. My reckoning is, well, I won't stop just yet, but I will in a minute. So my reckoning is that from year, it depends how much of the shortfall you roll forward and when you roll it forward too, when you start trying to recover that ground. And if you were to try to roll the full shortfall forward, including our net unmet need from Crawley during that time, you get some quite significant figures. It looks like you have a figure of over 400 to add in. I am going to stop there because I've probably gone too far. You might want to explain where you've come from first, and then we'll have that discussion. I will go around the table as well. But I'll give the council the opportunity of leading off on this.
Hi, thank you, sir. So in terms of the Crawley unmet need, I think we're broadly in agreement of the figure. I think we've used 3752 as a start point, and I think my quick maths, yours was around 3761, so very close. In terms of the step, I know we're talking slightly then about the supply and the trajectory, but certainly that's something that we...
Is everybody able to hear?
Sorry.
No. So I don't know whether this is very loud. Is there any way of making it louder?
I can talk up.
You can talk up. All right.
Yeah. I think in terms of the step, when we're then sort of moving slightly on to maths 2, that's something that we could look at building in to our supply in terms of meeting the way that the need is spread out across the 17-year period that arises from Crawley.
Yeah, I think in terms of the coast, I think the issue that we have, which we've kind of touched on a little bit this morning already, is that whilst we're not disputing that there is a relationship, I think that the concern is that because we've obviously got the years of a very low delivery, the concern is that clearly once we get to a point of those numbers become exceptionally challenging at the moment in terms of the additional sites that may be on our books, and therefore how much we can actually realistically accommodate and still have an effective plan. And I think that is why our hearing statement sets out that whilst we accept the Crawley number, we're at this point in time not convinced that we can meet the needs from the coast within this plan.
This is the art of the possible, as I said. I take that point. However, I think we shouldn't discount that. There may be an opportunity to do something. I had that conversation again with Mid Sussex, and we ended up with the range that they're testing, basically. We could go the same way this time, but let's just hear some views from the room. So, Mr. Berrand.
Thank you, sir. I think coming at it in terms of just the, I suppose the last point first, in terms of the South Coast. I think it's important, I think as you say, sir, to consider that there is a relationship between the South Coast and Horsham. And I think the other element to consider is it's almost where else in terms of the South Coast, in terms of the constraints it faces, in terms of the national parks to the north of those settlements, and the obviously the coast to the south of that, in terms of how is that going to be delivered. And I think this is where Horsham, Mid Sussex, there is that relationship between those two areas of saying, well, actually, what are the strategic levels of delivery we can provide in Horsham, in Mid Sussex, to address some of those needs, which are going to be phenomenally difficult to deliver in terms of those areas. And we're looking at Worthing, Brighton, Arran, Ada, and those areas are very constrained. I think the relationship between Mid Sussex, Crawley and Horsham is the strongest, but that doesn't mean that there isn't then a relationship between those South Coast authorities. What we set out in terms of our statements, so just a look in terms of those migration patterns. And I think there is that. And Then you look at paragraph 61 of the NPPF, which talks about the unmet needs of neighbouring areas. It's not necessarily just about local authorities, it's about neighbouring areas in terms of HMAs. So it's that strategic, looking at it a wider area, a wider strategic pattern of development and delivery to meet those needs. So I think it is important to look at those. It may well be a factor of how much can done support. That's about what is available in terms of that supply. But I think it's important to look at it in terms of actually how much can be delivered to support those areas. In terms of the sort of, I suppose, the plan period and the like, recognise your comments in terms of the extension of the plan period to 40 from 40 to 42 and whether that's necessary. You've set your thoughts out on that. In terms of when the plan period, the start of the plan period, I thoroughly agree it should be from the start of the point. Whether it should drop down or whether it should be the from the 911 or without the national park obviously included. If you looked at national policy, you'd say, well, actually, you can rely on that for 2 years and take it forward. But we are coming up to that 2-year period now, at which that may need to be reconsidered. I think keeping the plan period at 23 is essential. That's when the plan was submitted. And I can see where, in terms of the pragmatic way you've approached it, in terms of saying, well, actually, if we have to review the figure, we could come down. So I can understand. I think I would suggest that there isn't that significant difference to what the 911 and what's going forward. And actually, you should look at that, and I think it is in terms of what PPG says in terms of the guidance is said, kept under review and revised where appropriate. So it's whether you consider it appropriate, given that there isn't that significant difference, and there is a significantly higher level of housing need down the track in terms of the latest standard method. You know, is it not unreasonable to actually look at that in terms of that 911 across the entirety of the plan period? So I think that would be our concern, and I think those are the sort of the key points I would sort of make at the moment, Sarah, and then I'll follow up if depending on what comes out. Brilliant.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrand. Who else would like to speak? Yes, Ms. Piper.
Thank you, sir. I completely agree with Mr. Barrett's points, but fully accepting your view on the extension of the 15-year local plan period. I think there's a number of points, particularly to do with the south of the district, and we're obviously in this very uncertain period. There's a new local plan just about to start. There's also local government reorganisation, which has just been delayed. So, but I think the point that you made before is about having a rolling programme of housing, and the Worthing need is twice the amount of Crawley. It's been known a year longer than Crawley in the adopted plan. Worthing has nowhere else to go. Whereas at least Crawley has an option of going, as you talked about at Mid-Sussex, to Mid-Sussex. Worthing doesn't have that option. The two authorities either side of it are at very early stages and are in the same, or not as bad, but in a similar position in terms of previous unmet need. This unmet need has been known since at least 2016, when Horsham was then asked to join the coastal West Sussex authorities. So there is this incredible need on the south coast, and they have nowhere else to go. The other thing I'd like to say is that there are 3 HMAs that actually hit the south of Horsham. All 3 hit around Ashington and Henfield. So there would be a sort of greater good in terms of the influx of people coming and into the area or trying to get housing in that locality. Whereas to the north, which has at the moment about 80% of the allocations, the north of Horsham, it's very biased. If you take the 278 as a very crude split, it's very biased towards the north, and that only serves the northern Sussex, West Sussex HMA, not the other 2, which is the Brighton and East Sussex and the coastal one. So actually, by looking at this unmet need and looking at it equally, I would suggest, to Crawley, as I say, it's double the number and it's been known longer. then actually there should be some way of addressing that seriously, so that there is a rolling programme, so we can carry on making up for the water neutrality issues, getting Horsham back to a very good position that it was in always providing the housing it's required, and actually going over and above its normal housing standards. So it's not like the market and the house builders aren't ready to go forward on that.
Thank you, Ms Piper. Now, first of all, Ms Lamb, and then Mr Koniki, isn't it? Yes, Ms Lamb first.
Many thanks. I would agree with most of what's been said so far, particularly in relation to the baseline Horsham requirement and unmet needs, so I won't repeat too much of that. But I think it's your point around the art of the possible, and I'm not sure whether we've been there yet. The MPPF, I think, in 3 separate locations, paragraph 11, 35, 61, of course, the September 2023 MPPF, requires
I'm actually struggling hearing you there.
Sorry, I am often told that I've got a soft voice. Is that any better?
That's good.
Okay. And I think it's important that the Horsham plan looks at those levels of unmet need, whether or not it's possible to deliver them, and then move forward. But I feel at the moment that they've just simply said that the scale of the issue is so large that they can't go there yet. And I think we've taken a step too far too quickly. As we've heard, Crawley's unmet needs are up at 7,505. Then we've got the Coastal and Brighton unmet needs. We've got Worthing's, which over their plan period is just over 10,000 dwellings. We've got Ada. They've said in their statement of common ground that their current level of unmet need is unknown, but previously only able to accommodate approximately 50% of their need. And then we've got Brighton, which again is unknown, but I think anecdotally previously suggested that their unmet need could be as high as 1,000 dwellings per annum. And it's important to note that these numbers aren't just statistics, these are actual people in need. So whilst the scale of the issue is significant, I appreciate that this isn't necessarily one that Horsham alone can resolve, it does need to be considered with some importance. I also accept that Horsham, as part of the Northern West Sussex HMA, may consider the needs of that area as the most significant to consider, and acknowledge in their topic paper the contribution towards Crawley's unmet need. But that doesn't simply mean that as a lesser relationship with the coastal authorities in Brighton that shouldn't be explored further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lamb. Mr Koniki.
Thank you. I'm just going to really speak with regard to Horsham's need, so I won't really mention the unmet need of neighbouring areas. Firstly, I noticed the council made a clear statement, and I agree that housing delivery in Horsham district was severely affected for 4 years following the announcements, and 3 of those years sit at the start of this plan. And I think it needs to be made clear, because I'm not seeing this written anywhere, that the categoric reason why it is therefore reasonable to have a lower requirement in those water neutrality years is fully sanctioned by the MPPF under plan making paragraph 11b1, where habitats would have been damaged had housing delivery continued at higher rates. So those 3 years of the plan, arguably it should have been 4, I've put that in my paper, because that potentially will keep us into presumption even after we have hopefully a signed off plan by your good self, sir. So those 3 years are very special, and therefore I think it adds weight to your decision, sir, to recalculate the figures having come out of those years, because I'm reminded that if you do a calculation using the method, the relevant PPG states the affordability adjustment is applied to take account of past under delivery. The standard method identifies the minimum uplift that will be required, and therefore it's not a requirement to specifically address under delivery separately. Therefore, a fresh calculation to kick us off for the years following water neutrality is perfectly justified, and it will take into account under delivery in that period. as best as we can with the rules that the government has given us. So that's really my main point that I want to make. And so it's almost as though we've got two separate areas of the plan. When we move beyond the 1st of April 2026, as we are now, then it is absolutely clear that Horsham should be meeting, as a minimum, its LHN calculation appropriate for that period. I'm not going to say any more because it's all in my paper, so I'm sure you will have read it. So thank you for the opportunity to make those points.
Yeah, and I think we should bear your point in mind. There is a question about what we do about those first 3 years. Oh, and I want to come back to the council on that because I think we were going to expect some new completion figures, weren't we, coming up? But I'll leave that. I won't go there now, but if you've got that. But yes, I think that's something that we need to bear in mind, just as we need to bear in mind the issues of unmet need in adjoining authorities. So these things pull in different directions. But the critical thing, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow, is what actually is possible within the bounds of Horsham over the planned period in terms of capacity and what can actually be brought forward. So I think that may or may not have a bearing on ultimately what the requirement is. But I'm very interested in your approach to those first 3 years, and I think we'll have to consider that as we go forward.
Could I just add one very small point, please? You probably spotted it in my paper, but the basic essence was that if Horsham was so constrained in those early years, it could not meet its own requirements. Therefore, I did not incorporate picking up any of Crawley's requirement. I rolled them forward into the later period and therefore lifted those figures to make sure that over the remaining 14 years, we did pick up the 50% of Crawley. And in fact, I did look at apportioning them based on the step of unmet need that Crawley had put forward. And in reality, if you look at the figures, it does actually align almost perfectly with the in other words, not meeting any of Crawley's needs for those first 3 years, but then rolling those 3 years forward. It does all work out. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I did that kind of calculation, and if you discount the shortfall in those 3 years, what that does to the subsequent housing, because I think we're in a position here. I'm going to look at the council here, where you're not arguing for a Sedgefield approach in which you pull the shortfall into the first 5 years of the plan. You're looking at spreading it over the full plan, aren't you? And there is that question of what you do with those first 3 years in that context, and indeed the Crawley shortfall as well during that period, and whether you try and make that up. Yeah. All right, Mr. Bashford.
Morning, sir. Thank you. Just 2 points, please. One on the 9/11 housing need, and I mean it's in our statement, but just the question about using 2025 at the lower figure, is that an outlier in terms of the lower ones? If you look at the preceding years, it is closer to the 9/11 really. So again, you'll see in our representations we average that, but others have suggested that it's 911 throughout as well. So just raise that question. In terms of the contribution or making up sort of needs from neighbouring authorities, I think the first point to make is just in terms of relative constraints. I think now that water neutrality has been removed, Horsham has got, compared to other authorities, a lot less constraints. And second point really is just to endorse what people have been saying about the South Coast authorities. I think, the council say in their statement there's a far less clear pattern of movement, but you'll see in other people's statements as well is that actually it has got lots of significant unmet needs. There is clear patterns of commuting patterns in there, that's in other people's statements as well. And just in terms of the basic, if you look at, there's a plan I think in the council's matter statement, if you're looking figure 1, you can actually see the overlaps and some quite big settlements in the councils or proximity to Horsham as well. So we've got Haywards Heath there and other settlements as well. So there is quite a lot of overlap there as well. So, you know, there's a number of reasons why they should be included.
Thank you, Mr. Bashford. Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, sir. Can I address you first, if I may, on your topic A, which is the identification of the appropriate basic local housing need figure, and so I appreciate you touched on, and so have others, the unmet needs point, which I can address you on now as well, if that would be helpful, or if we're going to deal with it in more detail soon, then I can.
Do you know, these things are so interlinked that I'm quite happy for you to talk to any of those. I think I had 5 points, didn't I, in this?
Yeah, but I appreciate that they're all interlinked.
I don't mind if you want to do any of them.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start with the first point then, which is the appropriate basic local housing need figure, and so that figure is sensitive to two things. Firstly, the plan period, because every year has an annualised figure, and so I hear what your indication was a moment ago. I had planned to say some things about that, but I won't. But it's also sensitive to the local housing need figure that is used for each year of the plan period. And because we are now 3 years into the plan period, there is a backward-looking component to LHN and a forward-looking component to LHN. And so we agree that the figures set out in the Council's Matter 1 statement, as far as the backwards-looking component are concerned, are acceptable. And that approach has been to calculate the relevant annual figure using the data available for each of those years. Forward-looking, however, it's a different story. So that's 2026 to the end of the plan period. And so you'll be aware that the Council's approach in relation to that is to use 819 DPA and project it forward to the end of the plan period. The 819 figure for which is for 2025, is based on the 2023 standard method with a 2.3 discount for the SDNPA and also uses the latest affordability ratios published in March of this year. And as I say, the idea is that that will be projected forward to the end of the plan period. And so we don't think that is sound. We don't think that is the appropriate figure to project all the way to the end of the plan period. And the reason for that is that we know it's not uncertain that wouldn't meet the objectively assessed level of need for this district over that plan period. And so it wouldn't be sound in the sense that it wouldn't be positively prepared. Paragraph 35 requires as a minimum the OAN to be met and wouldn't be consistent with national policy. And that's the point that I'd like to elaborate now, the consistent with national policy. That's subparagraph D of paragraph 35 of the September 2023 framework. And so the requirement is for there to be consistency with national policy as expressed, not just in the framework itself, but also national policy expressed in the language used is other statements of national planning policy. And that's obviously primarily the PPG, the guidance. And so in paragraph 61, again, of the September 2023 framework, the indication is that the minimum number of homes needed needs to be informed by a local housing need assessment conducted using the standard method in national planning guidance. So again, it's a reference to the guidance, the PPG, and a similar reference is in the glossary definition of local housing need of the framework. So if we want to understand local housing need and objectively assessed level of need for the purposes of assessing soundness, we look at the guidance. And so it's a feature of the guidance and the way that the standard method is calculated that the figure changes over time. That's a feature of the planning system and the guidance, not a bug. And the PPG, sir, deals with the consequences of this moving target, as it were, expressly, and it's paragraph 8 of the Housing and Economic Needs Assessment Guidance, and the header is, when should strategic policy making authorities assess their housing need figure for policy making purposes? And we've already heard a reference to it a moment ago, that the housing need figure generated using the standard method may change, the inputs are variable, and this should be taken into consideration by plan making authorities. And so then there's an indication that LHN calculated using the standard method may be relied on for plan making for a period of 2 years from the time that the plan is submitted to PINS for examination. So there's effectively a 2-year period of grace post-submission where there is an operational and pragmatic immunity effectively from the yearly changes to the standard method. And so that's quite a long time. 2 years is quite a long time for that immunity to exist, particularly given that examinations should be capable of taking place in less time than that. And here, sir, the plan was submitted. I appreciate that it has been on ice effectively or in the long grass for a while, but it was submitted in July 2024, the end of July 2024. And so that period of grace expires in July of this year, after which the 2023 based standard method can no longer be relied upon. And the latest one has to be used. It has to be used when calculating local housing need. And so what we say is that projecting forward from 2026 onwards, it's the latest figure that has got to be used. And if it's not used, then the local housing need in the plan for those forward years won't be based on national policy. And in reality will mean that they won't be meeting need, that the need planned for won't actually be meeting the local housing need or the objectively assessed level of need, which is really the kind of mission critical requirement for this whole process, for the plan making process, that the core mission is to meet that need, sir, based on up-to-date evidence. And up-to-date evidence, as you'll know, sir, is referenced to in paragraph 31 of the framework. And just in terms of the figures, sir, the figures, the basic figures before the reduction for the South Downs National Park was 911. The 2026 figure is 1338. So it's a 46% increase, which is significant on any view. And so what we say is, in order to be sound, in order to meet the need that we know will exist, does exist, to meet the minimum need, that 1338 figure needs to be projected forward from 2026 to the end of the plan period, which after the 2.3% reduction for the national park is 1307. So that's the minimum number of homes needed in those remaining periods of the plan period. And so just the final point on that is it's important that that figure is used also in the context of the unmet needs point, because if we have a discussion about what percentage or how much unmet need can be catered for, the assumption is that the allocations proposed or the supply proposed to meet it will actually meet the unmet need. Whereas if the local housing need just for this district is 1307, then actually the unmet need sites or supply won't actually meet the unmet need. It will just go towards meeting this need. So that's what I wanted to say about the about the LHN, the basic, as you put it, so in your note, the basic LHN going forward. So for 2026 to the end of the plan period, it needs to be the 1307 figure in order to comply with policy and in order to be effective, justified, etc., based on an up-to-date evidence. If I can then turn to the unmet need point again, and it's just to seat this point, the question of how much unmet need should be accommodated here, just to seat it in the policy context. So that the starting point, again, in the 2023 framework is paragraph 20, which says that strategic policies should set out an overall strategy for the pattern, scale and design quality of places and make sufficient provision for housing. And then footnote 13 of paragraph 20 says, in line with the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And so the presumption in favour of sustainable development in paragraph 11 of that framework, the September 2023 framework, is paragraph 11. And so, as you know, it has a plan making as well as a decision taking component. And it goes without saying, sir, that it's important and, well, critical, sir, for the council to apply the plan making component or dimension of the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and so for you to assess soundness and whether the plan is sound based on that policy too. And so for plan making, the presumption in favour of sustainable development is that all plans should meet the development needs of their area, as well as any needs that can't be met within neighbouring areas. So that's the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and it's subject then, of course, to exceptions, to two exceptions in Roman 1 and 2. One is the footnote 7 exception, and that's the strong reasons for restricting the overall scale, type or distribution of development, or the perhaps more common one, which is any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The benefits are massive, sir. The benefits of meeting the unmet need from neighbouring areas, which are some of the most deprived areas in the country, in Brighton and Crawley in particular. The benefits are astronomical, and so the council needs the council needs to explain to you, sir, why that test would be met to disengage the presumption, and it is a presumption, that all of the unmet needs ought to be met in this area, and that's a minimum. That's as a minimum, sir. And the approach taken, sir, at the moment, which we've heard today, is to point to historical reasons why supply has been constrained. But so I just point out that really does respectfully fall a very long way short of a faithful and robust application of the core presumption in favour of sustainable development for plan making purposes that has got to be applied. It's got to be applied if the plan is to be found sound. It's not enough just to say that it's very unlikely that that significantly greater levels of delivery in the future will be achieved. The onus is on the council to show, firstly, what the levels of unmet need in its neighbouring areas are, and secondly, why they shouldn't be accommodated, applying the presumption. So showing you, sir, why there is a strong reason why they shouldn't be accommodated, or showing that the benefits, which are massive benefits, would be significantly and demonstrably outweighed by the adverse impacts of doing so. So it obviously goes without saying, so that if those unmet needs are not met in Horsham, which is a relatively unconstrained district, certainly compared to Mid-Sussex, for example, then they simply won't be met anywhere in this area in a plan-led way. And that's a situation that's got to be avoided, we say, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mackenzie. Some of those points I'll come back to the council on later.
Yes, of course.
Right, Councillor Sallows.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of discussion about numbers and real needs, but we haven't heard any justification, certainly for local unmet need. The actual housing requirement numbers in terms of the housing lists that exist have been stable for the last 5 years, despite the low delivery of housing. The actual house price area, when measured against inflation, has been going down in the area. So all of the indicators of need tend to suggest that there isn't an unmet need despite a low supply. So the arguments in favour of using the lower numbers of the government's own national figures seem to be much more relevant to what we're seeing in the local area. And if this unmet need was real, we would see house prices going up, we would see a growing housing waiting list. But neither of those are the case. So I think that all of the things that are being said about numbers don't reflect any of the reality of what's happening in the area. And we're not measuring things against the other, we're talking about massive benefits if we boost these housing numbers. The massive benefits in terms of the government's own environmental policies are clearly not being met. The benefits in terms of the government's own policies for housing distribution, development distribution across the country aren't being met. So there's a number of factors that are definitely not massive benefits if we carry on to grow the housing in this area at a rate which is obviously beyond its current needs, real needs.
Yes, the issue of unmet need in adjoining authorities is a very interesting one because this is all theory. So Crawley produces a local plan. It can only meet a certain amount of its identified housing need. There is therefore a figure. Similarly, on the south coast, there is therefore an unmet need figure. That's a kind of theoretical figure because, of course, in reality, there isn't a fence around Crawley and there isn't a fence around Brighton or Worthing, and those who growing numbers of households from those areas will move into Horsham and Mid-Sussex, places like that anyway. Now, what that does is actually increase competition for available homes within those areas and actually diminish the opportunities available for those who already, households that are forming within those existing districts, within Horsham, within Mid-Sussex. So, we're treating it as if there are fences around these places, but actually it's not the case, of course.
I fully agree with your points, but that need has existed in those areas already, and that outpouring from those areas into the Horsham district is already occurring, and that will be reflected in the council's housing list and within house prices in the area. And neither of those are showing indication that need isn't being met. That's what my argument is.
I'll pick that point up, and I don't know whether everybody else wants to address this, because there is perhaps Mr. Murray Coxwell, who's got his flag up. No. But there is sometimes an argument put, and I'm sure it would put in relation to the post-2024 LHN calculation, which is that levels of unmet need in one authority actually already have an impact on the LHN of adjoining authorities like Horsham, like Mid-Sussex, through the affordability multiplier, which is more or less what you're saying, I think. So I'll put that out there. I don't know, again, council might want to respond to that. What we're doing, of course, is planning forward rather than reacting to overhangs of unmet need that have existed, for example, in Worthing for many years, Brighton for many years, which will have had an effect on the affordability ratio. But of course, we're planning forward as well. And that's the difference, because, Crawley's plan identified unmet need. Going forward, it's not a backward-looking exercise. And the same with the coastal towns. But anyway, we could talk for a long time on that. I'm sure the council will made a note of that and will want to respond to it. Mr. Murray Cox.
Thank you, sir. I think it is a different point. So as we spoke to you about in Mid-Sussex local plan sessions, our firm position is that this plan should provide 50% of Crawley's unmet need. You allowed Mr. Mackenzie to go slightly beyond where we think we are on your topics, so I will as well, if that's okay. There is the separate issue of what else might then feed into the housing requirement. And in the council's statement for today, it's a very short response to that question. I think it's 4 lines long. It essentially says there is no other reason. And our simple point on that is that it requires much more exploration than that. There is, as we've put in our statement, it's in the council's evidence as well, a very significant affordable housing need here. How does the plan interface with that? But more significantly, and as I spoke about in the Mid-Sussex session as well, the Crawley unmet need figure is against their LHM, as you know. But there is sat behind that separate work done for the North West Sussex HMA, which explores affordable housing need. Now, the affordable housing need in Crawley is astronomical, and is the unmet need figure generated at LHM is a fraction of that. The affordable housing need from Crawley is greater than what Crawley can ever wish to accommodate. And there is a significant issue here, just as in Mid-Sussex, spatially around how that is dealt with. And it may not be, strictly speaking, relevant to this topic for today, but there is the question of how you deal with that spatially, where sites are to meet the need. Mr. Mackenzie made the point to you about whether or not the work has been done to assess what the MPPF tasks the authority would do, doing the presumption in favour, tackling constraints, benefits, and the need to accommodate development. And you were very clear in the sessions in Mid-Sussex about there being no absolute constraints. And whether or not it's today or at some point in the future, this is a plan which has been prepared on the basis of there being absolute constraints. The clearest example of that is the national landscape. No assessment has been given as to the role that part of the district can play in tackling the question that we're dealing with now. Sites were discounted at first pass. So when it comes to the issue of how this authority deals spatially with Crawley's unmet need, before we even get into anything on the south coast, we don't have any material for us to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. That's although it went beyond the topic for today, we are going to have, I think, a spatial strategy session in due course. I did wonder about having such a session in this set of hearings, but as I did with Mid-Sussex, but actually I've deferred it for the simple reason I think there's so much work to do in terms of site selection that it would be better to have that discussion later on. We will have that discussion. There are no more flags up, but there are a number of points that have been raised here that I will put back to the council. The question of what do you do about the shortfall from the early years? How do you deal with that? The question of the LHM, which LHN are you using? Now, I have to say, I heard what Mr. Mackenzie said. My initial view on this is that because we're dealing with such substantial numbers anyway in terms of unmet need from Crawley, potentially from the south coast. And then when you start thinking about supply and how you're going to maintain a 5-year supply, there are some very big numbers in there. And as I said right at the start, this is the art of the possible. It's not a purist approach. You cannot do that here. But nonetheless, the council needs to look very seriously at what it can do within the figures that we've got, within, and I'm sorry to say, I think our environmental constraints do come in to this. Also do delivery considerations, what can actually be achieved over that period. But there are some big numbers here, bringing forward shortfalls, rolling them forward over the remainder of the plan period. That changes complexion substantially. You end up with some very big annual numbers. If you then play in 185 from Crawley and then 273 from Crawley, you get even bigger numbers. If you then make an allowance for the south coast, let's say it's 100, let's say it's 50, you get even bigger numbers. And then you have to think about maintaining that through a process of supply, which might require a contingency figure. You've looked at 8% and you've looked at 10%, I think. So those have to be added in as well. When you finish that, you're looking at very big supply numbers that you're going to have to find. So what I want to do, I think, first of all, I'd like you to answer some of the points that have come up. Then I think perhaps we'll take a break first. I'll let you think about those. And then we'll come back and you can answer those points. And we can have a further discussion in which we can consider some of the numbers that have been put about, in particular the sort of numbers that Mr. Mackenzie was talking about. So I'm going to break now. Are you content to do that? Have a think. I'll break for a decent amount of time. So I'll give us half an hour. Is that enough for the moment? We'll come back at 10 to 12. Put some thought to some of the things being raised, and we'll try to become a little bit more definite, a little bit clearer about. If you need more time, I'll give you more time. Do you need more time?
We'll take half an hour first.
Half an hour first, yes.
If that's all right.
That's fine.
But I actually don't believe that the answers are terribly complicated.
Well, that's promising. All right. We'll adjourn now. We'll resume at 10 to 12. that people can hear. Right, I'm going to go to the council now and I invite you to respond to some of the points that have been made this morning.
So perhaps I can start by addressing paragraph 8 of the guidance referred to by Mr. Mackenzie. We have to keep a sense of proportion when we look at this, interpret it and apply it. First of all, it is guidance, and therefore its application and the weight to be given it will depend upon the circumstances. But let's first of all start off with what it is actually trying to do. It acknowledges that need figures change. Inevitably, of course, they do. But in terms of bringing certainty to the plan-making process, it also acknowledges, specifically in this case, that local housing need calculated using the standard method. There may be other means of calculating the housing need figure, but where it is calculated using the standard method, the figure relied upon for plan making purposes can be relied upon for a period of 2 years from the time the plan is submitted to the inspectorate for examination. Now, the reason it's here is to bring a degree of certainty to the examination process, so that figure doesn't change throughout or during that process. It gives certainty to the examination process, and it is in line with good administration in the public interest. It shouldn't be interpreted as meaning that once that 2 years has expired, there is a mandatory requirement, as it were, to revisit that figure and start over again. That would not be in the public interest. It is not this local authority's fault that the examination process has taken longer than this particular paragraph would allow for. 2 years actually from the submission of the plan for examination periods is quite generous. It would be wholly wrong to interpret this as meaning that all the work that's gone into this plan should suddenly be abandoned in favour of looking at a new, much higher figure and starting over again. Bearing in mind we are now going to embark upon a new planning process under the new system this year, progressing this plan on the basis of the standard method calculation relevant to this plan and the relevant edition of the MPPF is entirely appropriate. It's in the interest of good administration and will provide a very sound basis for orderly planning throughout the period of the preparation of the new plan before its subsequent adoption. So one must keep a sense of perspective about the implications and effect of paragraph 8 in that context. I don't need to say anything more about that unless I can help you further on that point. I'm going to pass over now to my team to deal with the more substantive issues, if I may.
Thank you. Ms. Howe.
Thank you. I'll start and then pass along the line as we go. I think really to begin with, the first point is that obviously, and as you identified at the beginning, our starting point has been one of having a consistency of approach with the Mid-Sussex calculations, and we still see no reason to vary that. It makes the most, it's the most sensible approach in terms of understanding, what we're both jointly working to, and indeed, you're in a position otherwise where you're sort of comparing apples with oranges, essentially. In terms of some of the other aspects, I think it's perhaps helpful to draw attention to the appendix to matter 1, our topic paper, so HDC JB04A, and on the very final page, there are a number of growth options which are identified, and obviously that, I think, just to be clear, we are looking at obviously modelling a number of either the low, medium and high growth. What that obviously does is to look at a range of options, and we've not said that we wouldn't be testing those. Obviously, clearly within that, that can obviously potentially accommodate elements for the coast. But obviously what we need to make sure, and it goes back to the art of the possible in terms of, you know, what we haven't yet done is obviously in terms of understanding that is, you know, what is exactly going to be deliverable. That work is ongoing. So at this particular stage, we're not in a position where we can definitively confirm what can or cannot be achieved until that has been completed. And I think you know, the other real point is it's just recognising, of course, that you know, we need a degree of you know, the plan has to be proportionate, it has to be flexible in terms of what can and cannot be achieved, really, in terms of, and that's come through from letters from Matthew Pennycook. So that, for example, the one on the 9th of October in 2025, and there needs to be that degree of pragmatism. Recognising that obviously within the new local plan that we will be commencing with, you know, almost in short order, that can obviously be looked at going forward. And I will pass on to my colleagues to some of the other matters of detail.
Thank you, and I'll try and speak up this time. So I was just going to address 2 of the points that we discussed before the break. Firstly, the point around the first 3 years of the plan and the actual delivery versus the requirement figures. The point that was made by Mr. Korniski, we've noted, we understand his position and we understand the point that he's making. The approach that we've taken is to set this sort of overall requirement figure for the plan using the local housing need as the basis, then to look at the delivery in those first 3 years and to essentially neutralise those years, then to address any shortfall arising from those years across the rest of the plan. So I think our position is that that is a reasonable approach to have taken, as opposed to you know, not meeting that sort of gap in requirement versus delivery. We just intend to meet that up until 2040. The second point I think was raised by Rusper Parish Council. That was to do with sort of unmet need and whether how that's reflected in various kind of metrics in the district. And I think, in short, we agree with your position, sir, that the unmet need going forward is reflected in the affordability figures, which then feeds into the standard method. So that's the sort of position that we take. We also, as an authority, take very seriously the need to meet not only the need in the authority in our district area, but also our need elsewhere, recognising that if that isn't met as far as it possibly can be, that then translates to our met need in our district. So that's the position we've taken. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, over me, sir. I think before I go back to unmet needs on the coast, you inquired as to the 3rd year completion information. We've got data now from the County Council who hold that, and we will be doing the starts and completions exercise next week. So we should be able to update you sometime in May what was actually completed, although I think we've allowed for around 470 units in our calculations, which may or may not be exactly right. We will come to see. So I don't think we've ever said that there isn't the connection with the South Coast. Clearly, although our local planning authority isn't contiguous with that area because the national park is in the way, it's agreed that there is tens of thousands of homes that aren't being met by those respective authorities. However, it is true, and I think Ms. Lamb made the point, that our plan does look north. I suppose most of our sites are north, most of our communities are in the north in terms of overall population. So our focus has been, and I think it is correct, on our established relationship with Crawley and Mid Sussex, and that remains the starting point for our spatial strategy, which I'm sure other days will cover.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kleiman. We will come on to the spatial strategy in a future hearing, I think, because I do want to pick up those points about, the fact that the plan does look north, but there is a question of whether some of the South Coast need should be met nearer to that area. So let me just understand then where you're coming from. Is that, from what you said, Ms. Hayes, that those first 3 years of the plan, you're aggregating the shortfall from those years, and presumably also aggregating the shortfall from, or anticipated shortfall, from years 4 to years 7 as well. Is that right? Because you're talking about a lower housing requirement figure for those years.
Yeah, so I think perhaps they're two slightly different issues that have been addressed in the step trajectory. So the first 3 years, what we're proposing is that they match what's been delivered. And so obviously that third year, as Mr. Kleiman said.
Sorry, I'm with it. Yeah. No, I
and
get
then
that.
the sort of step in terms of future delivery comes into play.
So the first 3 years, first year 452, you're saying that should be the requirement for that year.
Yeah.
320, the requirement. It's more or less actually what Mr. Kanika was saying, I think.
Yes.
Second year 320 is your actual requirement for that year.
Yes.
And the third year, we don't know what the completion figures are yet, but you're reckoning on 400 and what did you say?
420.
470, sir.
470. But whatever that comes out at, that would be your housing requirement for that year. So you're not then rolling those forward, but then you're starting in year 4 until year 7, I think, with 734.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that then does give shortfall. And the question is how you calculate that shortfall, because are you aggregating the LHN of 819 with the unmet need from Crawley for those years as well, which I think by my calculation, half of is 185 per annum. Am I right?
For the first 10 years.
For the first 10 years take up to year 10, but because your 734 only goes up to year 7, doesn't it?
So the approach in terms of the step and the annual supply has been based on essentially the overall requirement figure, and then how we think that might be deliverable and what might be a reasonable step, rather than taking the approach that a particular need in Crawley arises in years 1 to 10 and then 11 to 17. So that the potential shortfall in those early years is then made up essentially in the later years where the step increases.
So are you applying a uniform figure for Crawley across the,
Yes.
rather than stepping it?
In terms of the annualised requirement, yes.
You come to the same figure in the end
Yes.
for years 4 to 17? And you're discounting years 1 to 1
So
to
no,
3.
the Crawley requirement figure is built into every year, 1 to 17.
1 to 17.
As a 2
Okay.
2 1, which is
Okay.
just half the figure over the 17 years.
So you're building that in.
Yeah.
So you're not stepping it. Should come out at the same figure.
Mhm.
And then you're applying 890 and 896 to the first 2 years, but that's not relevant anyway, is it? If you're actually establishing a housing requirement at 452 and
So the let me just get the figures right. The 890, the 896 and the 819 are what have been used to settle on a kind of overall requirement figure over the 17 years.
Yeah.
Then so it's essentially as though if there were an annualized figure, it would be 1049, I think it is, over those years. But then what we're proposing is almost a kind of double step, I suppose, in that we've got the 3 years of where we're saying that the annualized requirement in that year should match delivery.
Yeah.
Then the sort of slight step up.
Okay, so I think I misunderstood you. So in fact, you are counting in the first 3 years fully.
In terms of requirement,
but you're
yes.
spreading it over.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you didn't do what Mr. Kaniki said.
No.
You actually took the whole amount for those
Yes.
years, and you spread them over.
Yeah.
Plus, you're spreading that half of the Crawley requirement across those years
Yes.
as well. And you're coming up with 1049 annualized. Is that's that's both Crawley and
Yes.
yeah. All right. Yes. So the question really is, on top of that, if that's meeting your LHN on the basis of 819, I've heard what other people have said about, that figure. And then you're adding Crawley on an annualised basis. The question then is, what about the South Coast? So I'll put that back to you.
So I think that's where Ms Howes directed you to the appendix that sits alongside matter 1. I think that's what we would be testing potentially under the high growth scenario.
So I'm not sure I'm looking at the same document as you. So I've got what I thought was the matter 1 appendix, but it says updated trajectory February 2026. That's the one, is it?
Yes. Yeah.
And if one goes to the very bottom of that table.
Yes.
You see the three scenarios.
Oh, there you are. Yes.
So the bottom row, the high growth scenario, which is 20,100, that would incorporate potentially, certainly in terms of testing scenarios, an element of coastal unmet need.
Yes. So your low growth scenario is approximate to your 1049 annualized.
Yeah.
Then you're testing 2 other growth scenarios, 1135 and 1182.
Yes. Yeah.
Which the top one, 20,100. And that's a requirement figure, not a supply figure. That's what I'm interested in, because there's a difference.
No, I think that's a supply figure that we're testing. So that's slightly different from the requirement in terms of these are the scenarios that we're testing in terms of sort of infrastructure implications.
Right.
But I think the point is that in terms of testing whether the coastal unmet need could be met, that's incorporated in that work.
Right. So, but it doesn't incorporate Crawley's unmet need is in there already.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, this is an issue that comes up. That there could be headroom which would potentially accommodate or potentially allow for resilience, but also potentially create some provision for the south coast, albeit that it wouldn't be within your requirement.
Yes.
And normally you would seek to meet unmet need by consolidating it in your requirement.
Yes. Yeah. But obviously, yeah, the requirement figure that we've put forward in the Matter 1 topic paper has just the Crawley figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll stop there. I've got 2 flags up. I'll go to Mr. Berend first.
Thank you, sir. I think I'd agree with your last point there in terms of if a figure is going to be included for the South Coast authorities, then that would need to be included within the requirement, because that has to be, effectively that is a requirement from those areas that comes into the Horsham local plan. And then on top of that, you would have a headroom. You couldn't have a headroom that takes account of some of that, because you're double counting it in terms of what it's intended for. So I think it's important that there is this distinction made between what is there for headroom and what is there within the requirement to deliver against the needs of the South Coast or for Crawley. So they would be rolled into the requirement. I think this is where the difficulty we get in terms of the step, because the step includes the figures related to the requirement, but we don't know what the supply figures are against that requirement because they haven't been included. So until we know what sites and what is included to meet the unmet needs of the other areas, we don't know what an appropriate step would be. It's only until we have those figures that we can have a conversation as to actually where is the appropriate, what is the 5-year land supply figures in terms of across the plan period, and actually whether you can get the smaller sites and that might deliver earlier in the plan periods to complement those strategic sites. So you get whether there might be a step, but it might be a possibility to have a more even delivery across the whole of the plan period. But without those sites, we don't know. So we've been given a step here, but a step without to meet a higher level of need, but without the sites that go alongside that step to say whether it's an appropriate one or not. And I think that's obviously for spatial strategies and sessions later on. So I think that's my sort of initial consideration in terms of what's being put forward, is that the requirement needs to be included, the unmet needs needs to be included in the requirement, plus any headroom within this overall supply, but we don't know about what the step should be until we know what those figures are. The other point is turning to Mr. Kleinman's point in terms of the strategy that looks north. Obviously, we can look north in terms of Mole Valley, and there are unmet needs in Mole Valley as well in terms of that. So it's not necessarily just about the South Coast. If there are those twin elements in terms of where the unmet need is arising. Granted, Mole Valley could go back and look at their greenbelt and a far more permissive MPPF strategy at the moment, but which is very different to the very constrained areas in the south, on the South Coast. But it's still a level of unmet need that hasn't been addressed and needs to be a consideration with any local plan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Berend. Mr. Koniki.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to go through a bit clearer what my proposal is regarding those first 3 years and the impact later. So I agree with the council, the requirement for those 3 years should be set 414, 452 and 320, sorry, 452, 320 and 472, the figures that we now know them. Because the requirement is set so low, because of water neutrality, and that's allowed for in the MPPF, then that requirement cannot include anything for Crawley. So in my proposal, that is the requirement, and there's no requirement, that requirement has not been increased by any accommodation need for Crawley. So that's why I've rolled the Crawley support not to start until the first year when we're out of water neutrality, i.e. 2026-27. And when I looked at the unmet need for Crawley in the first 10 years, so that's up to year 33, it was declared as 369 dwellings per annum. It then rises. So if you just concentrate on the first 10 years, first of all. So 10 times 369 is 3690. Halve it is 1845. if you then look at what I proposed, I've done a level 268, 7 times 268 is 1876, so more or less the same number. By spreading it over the 14 years, we actually meet the declared need from Crawley up to 2033. Now, the key point is then, is there a shortfall in those 3 years? Now, in my experience, I'm not a professional planner at all, my experience is that shortfall is measured against requirement. Shortfall is not measured and carried forward Lichfield and all that sort of stuff against need. So there is no shortfall in those first 3 years, and therefore that it reinforces the proposal to recalculate the need at the start of the years of year 2026 using the very, very latest figures. So we pick up all the affordability that's been built up as a result of alleged under provision of need during the water neutrality. I read one of the papers submitted and it tried to make out that that was a one-off, some bodge in the, well, not a bodge in the figures, but because mortgage rates were high and this, that and the other. Well, we've now got 2 of those, because if you recalculate the figure using the March 2026 figure, it stays more or less at that equivalent low figure. And so if you do all that, what you then end up with, coming all the way to the council's low growth option, and I'm not saying that shouldn't be the a good requirement to look at. If you do that, you don't carry forward that fictitious shortfall, in my view, because it is not a shortfall of requirement, then the low growth option provides around about 1,250 homes beyond Horsham's need, beyond 50% of Crawley's need, potentially towards unmet need in other areas. So that's the impact if you go with Horsham's low growth. Whereas as presented by the council, all it meets is Horsham's need plus 50% of Crawley's need. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in terms of meeting past undersupply, there's a difference between what happens before the beginning of the plan period and what happens after the plan period. So what happens after the plan period is counted, and what happened before doesn't count. So there is a difference there. Right, Mr. Mackenzie, you've got your flag up.
Thank you, sir. Sir, yes, can I just make a few comments on the low growth, medium growth, and high growth proposals to go back and test those. And the starting point says that there's a really important distinction that needs to be made between housing need and what the housing requirement is. And so the PPG on housing and economic needs assessment addresses this in 3 sections, paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and says that housing need is an unconstrained assessment of the minimum number of homes needed in an area, and that's the first step in the process of deciding how many homes need to be planned for and should be undertaken separately from assessing land availability and establishing a housing requirement. And it goes on to say that the standard method.
I might just stop you there because I know all this.
No, I know, sir.
You know,
but my point is that I think there's a risk, sir, that what the council are doing in relation to the low growth, medium growth, and high growth options are effectively saying that their requirement figure is going to be based on, I think it's not clear, one of those options, as opposed to with a starting point, which is to assess what the full local housing need is.
I fully understand that, and I think we had a similar thing in Mid Sussex. Is it top down? Is it bottom up?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly that point.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. You have got to start from going back to what we said. There are building blocks. You've got to start from them. Ultimately, the ability to deliver at whatever level will have to be tested anyway, and we'll come back to that. We won't be able to resolve that tomorrow because we don't know where the sites are. But we will be coming back to that later on in the sets of hearings that we're going to have later on in the year. We've got a meeting on Friday to talk about when that will be. Whilst fully understanding that and also appreciating the background both in terms of the NPPF and the PPG, we also have to look pragmatically at what can be achieved. I was going to say that, and I agree with Mr. Barron, by the way, on the how you count in any unmet need from the South Coast, because normally unmet need will be counted for as part of the housing requirement. That's very important because then that is a bottom line against which you have to deliver, and therefore you are meeting those unmet needs. If you include that within headroom, that headroom can vanish. And therefore any ability to meet unmet need can vanish. We'll talk about headroom tomorrow. It's a really difficult subject. The emerging NPPF gives a kind of opt-out thing where, okay, if you don't have your 5-year housing supply, then you could start building adjacent to settlements. I don't suppose the council wants that. It's had a few years of tilted balance. You want to get back in control. So what we have to do is to establish, first of all, a basic housing requirement that we can work from. And then, quite rightly, you've got to test that. You've got to see what sites are available. My inclination is that to look at this is you do need to make an allowance for, it's an acknowledged need on the South Coast. You've got 2 HMAs down there, I think, that both have significant unmet need. The question is the level of provision that you need to make there. And you could test, I mean, so with Crawley, what are you counting in there per annum? Have you got an annualised figure? The calculation I did divided it into this.
Yeah, it's 221.
It's 221.
Yeah.
Yeah, annualised. And that Crawley is right on your doorstep. We know that there's a massive amount of unmet need there. It's been identified. It's been quantified in the local plan. It's there. Mid Sussex are looking at potentially accommodating half. It's right that Horsham should do that. So we've got a definite figure there. With the South Coast, it's quite right. It's not quite as immediate. It's separated by the national park. There is more of an issue of quantification there as well, I think. Although the amount of unmet need is has been known for a while. So the question is how much. My feeling is I don't think you can go to the same quantums that you're looking at with Crawley. I think Crawley is the most immediate issue that you've got. You might be looking at something like 100 DPA, but I think you will need to look at how that works with your ability to deliver. And that is, sorry everyone, that is just a rounded figure. I don't know, because I don't think that the figure is being quantified between different authorities where you would go with that. I'm looking at you for a reaction. Sorry.
I mean, I can provide a reaction because what we're trying to do here is speculate to the best of our ability. I don't mean that as a criticism by any means, but one has to have regard to the HMAs, their functionality and their relationship to the primary housing market area, which affects Horsham, to see the extent to which there is an overlap and to which there is a functional relationship. First point. Second point is we have to consider things like migration. And that includes also travel to work, workplaces, where people live. Those matters that need to be taken into account. And it's probably a good comparator to use our adjoining neighbours and the figure we've allocated there in order to determine what the proportionality is with respect to the South Coast. So that's something we can certainly look at, most certainly.
Yes. Preferably to evidence-based, for sure, yes.
Yes, because there'd be no point in allocating a figure which was entirely speculative.
No. So what would that do? Well, how would that translate into a piece of work then that you would need to do?
It's something which I'm going to need to take away and discuss because clearly we would need to deal with this on a proportionate basis, having regard to the amount of time and administrative time that needs to be spent on dealing with all other issues of this plan and looking at sites. But if you would allow us, rather than me give you an answer now, if you allow us some time to consider how we might meet this challenge, I'd be grateful.
Well, we have the whole of this week, so is that enough for you? Yes.
We'll do our very best, yes.
All right, that's really helpful. Right, now, rather randomly, rather randomly, we've sort of covered items A to E. But I'm looking around to see if there's anybody who actually wants. I tell you what we didn't cover, and that's the South Downs allowance, which some people did refer to in their statements. Does anybody want to talk to that? No. All right. Do you want to explain that?
Yes, I'll start, and then obviously if the team want to come in, that's fine. So essentially, what we have done is to take account of the percentage of housing which is within the South Downs National Park element of Horsham District, and essentially our view is that obviously they're preparing their own plan. Much as it's a constrained area, they nevertheless have to look to meet housing needs. And since submission, there has been work that's been undertaken as to what that element would be. And work is ongoing in terms of statements of common ground, what have you, in that respect anyway. But from our perspective, we don't want to set a requirement that is effectively double counting an element that the national park would be, and therefore our view is that we drop that amount.
And it was a relatively small number anyway.
Yes, it's
in comparison.
221.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In comparison with the sort of figures we've been talking about today, so I'm looking round, but I'm content with the way you've approached that. All right, and there's no other flags up. So what I'm going to do, sorry, Mr. Mackenzie.
It's me again, sir. It was the point about the high growth option that I had started speaking to. There's just one sort of final point on that, which is just that there is a difference, and it's not clear why there is a difference between the growth options set out in the council's initial letter to you, sir, and the growth options tested in the actual sustainability appraisal stroke SCA of the plan, sir, which has actually tested significantly higher growth options. And so it's the SA update, December 2023, which tests a range of options going up to 30,600 is quantum option 5, quantum option 4 is 27.2, option 3 is 23,800. And so it's just the point that I was going to make before is that it's just not clear why the council have said that the high growth option that they're proposing to test over the course of this summer, which will be a really important piece of work because that will identify what the environmental implications are of meeting that figure. And it's on the basis of that evidence that the presumption in favour of sustainable development for plan making will then be applied. And so it's really just a flag that it's not clear why they've settled on a figure which is really significantly below all of the 3 out of 5 of the options which were tested in the SEA that underlines the plan. So that's the point I was going to make before. And then, sir, just in relation to the other matters, so it's the Gatwick Diamond and economic growth point. PPG is clear, and so is the framework, that authorities should consider the merits of planning for higher growth if they would support economic growth aspirations. And so it's important that the council gives consideration to that, sir, because despite, well, this district is critical to the Gatwick Diamond, which really is one of the UK's economic powerhouses. In this region, it's second only to the Thames Valley, and yet there's no evidence really at all that the council has sought to consider whether a higher growth above LHN plus unmet needs would be appropriate to support the economic growth aspirations of the Gatwick Diamond. And that's particularly important because when the Reg 19 plan, this version of it, was made, there was uncertainty about whether the Gatwick DCO would be granted. That has now been consented, and so Gatwick is being prioritised by government as a crucible of very, very significant economic growth. And so, given that PPG is clear that authorities should consider whether to uplift or whether the requirement should be based on supporting economic growth, that is a critical material change of circumstances since the Reg 19 plan was submitted to PINSA.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. That's very helpful. Let me put those 2 points back to the councillors. First of all, the SEA tested high growth options and the growth options that you're now suggesting. Although, of course, we know that that's going to, if you do that piece of work on the South Coast unmet need, that will change anyway. That's not going to stay in those figures. Nonetheless, the SEA tested high growth options. That's the first thing. Second thing is the influence of Gatwick Diamond and the growth of Gatwick and related growth. Would you like to address both of those?
I will start. So I think in terms of the sustainability appraisal, obviously, I think fundamentally time has moved on in a sense. So obviously, and it's an iterative process. That's the very nature of sustainability appraisal. So yes, we did start out looking at higher options. What we are looking at now is, again, it goes back to the art of the possible. We are looking at, with the highest growth option, potentially in the allocation of 3 strategic sites, additional sites, which is what that would potentially look at. And obviously within that would have significant environmental impact. We have to test that. Beyond that, we are looking at an issue where, well, are those sites available? Do we actually have them? At which point, we are looking at a new local plan, but if you get to a point where actually it isn't practicable to do it under this local plan, and therefore we have to look at what are reasonable options, and that is what our view now is. In terms of Gatwick, I may turn to Ms Hayes shortly, because she was actively involved in the DCO hearings, but fundamentally they have, obviously the DCO has indeed been granted, but the assumptions of growth around that have been factored into their assumptions, and that included local plan growth. But I don't know, Julia, whether you've got any further comments.
And I don't think there's anything further to add, just that the kind of environmental work that took place with the DCO took account of growth broadly that's in line with growth that we're talking about now in terms of the plan and the sites. It's not a change in circumstances, I don't think.
So let me understand that a bit further. So I have seen correspondence and evidence on this, but what you're saying is that the figures in the plan were tested, not in the plan.
No, so the growth that was proposed in the submission plan, which was the plan that was sort of in the public domain at the time that the DCO examination took place, essentially the environmental statements and the work that went on with the DCO, there were no issues raised in terms of sort of housing supply, workforce, etc., on the basis of the growth that was in the submission local plan.
Yes, I think I read the evidence on that. So we're talking here not about the submission plan that is the basis of this examination, but the plan that you had prepared prior to that, with that level of growth in the previous where you were meeting local need.
Well, it would have been I think it's the submission plan as was.
As was, yeah.
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 And that was tested, wasn't it? And I think it was said that at the time there wasn't need for an uplift because
of
the
essentially
growth expectations arising from Gatwick and its environs
Yes.
was already accommodated in the local plan and in other plans, I think, as well.
Yeah, the sort of pipeline of the plans in the areas around the airport was sufficient to meet demand arising from the DCO.
The opportunity to revisit that question will come up anyway when you're producing another plan.
Yeah.
In due course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And as far as the SCA was concerned, yes, you tested higher. This is what you're saying. You tested higher options, but that was the theoretical basis, an earlier theoretical plan stage. We're now looking at now. What are these growth options rooted in? I suppose is the question.
So they're rooted in sites that we are considering as part of the work that we're doing on the evidence updates that we've covered in the letter that we sent to you so very early on, and very early work on what supply might come forward from those different scenarios, different site scenarios.
Right, so this is a supply side
Yes. Yeah.
diagram, isn't it? Table. But from discussion we've had this morning, it looks like the requirement would be up towards the high growth scenario.
Yes.
And therefore your supply side would need to be higher than that for resilience purposes.
Yeah.
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 All right, now. Right, look, I'm going to take a couple more contributions, and then I think we'll move to a finale. But I'll go to. Yes, I can see you, Ms. Piper. Who else wanted to speak? It was from the front row. I'm going to go to Councillor Sallows first, and then you, Ms. Piper.
Just a very brief point. We've been talking about the growth requirements in relation to Gatwick, and the Gatwick Diamond is a general growth area, but Gatwick Airport, in its submissions to the second runway, was clearly stating that there was no dependence on any extra housing coming forward to meet their growth requirements. So in terms of Gatwick Airport itself, that is an issue. And in terms of recent events in the Middle East and the subsequent knock-on effects on aviation, that we must expect in the short term at least a decline in any growth in relation to Gatwick itself. That's, I think, important consideration.
I've got that point. Ms. Piper.
Thank you, sir. It probably comes on to your final point about are there any other things, but just while we're talking about numbers and particularly looking at the growth, the low, medium and growth numbers, those annualised figures, the high growth one is 1182. I just wanted to highlight that before water neutrality, Horsham was against a annualised need of 800 dwellings per year. Horsham was actually doing 1,200. Achieved 1,200 in 2015, 2016, 1,125 in 2017, 2018, 1,369 in 2018, 2019. Then it started to decline. But the point is, before water neutrality, Horsham was a place where people wanted to build and built well, and the council allowed them to do that in their policies against a need of 800. What I'm suggesting is that if we go too low, even on this which I'm fast thinking as an interim plan, but hopefully we won't consider it that, the 1182, maybe we should be aiming higher so we don't undershoot on that, because if they can achieve, you know, significant numbers over 800, then that certainly would lead to figures above the 1182, but also then there's a proportionate uplift from that as a bar.
Thank you, Ms Piper. So just coming back to the council again, you had a very good track record of delivery going back pre-water neutrality and pre-COVID as well, I think. Can't you re-achieve that?
Yes, I think we can, but I think this comes back to the point that we need a step in the early part of the plan, in the requirement and the supply, to reflect what's in the, essentially the sort of legacy impact of water neutrality, so what's in the pipeline now, and when we think those higher levels of growth can start to come forward. Essentially what's in those annualised figures is annualised, so it's simply an average.
I don't want to sort of preempt things that we're going to talk about tomorrow, because I think we will talk about supply and, again, the art of the possible. So I take the point you're making. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this hearing to a close this morning. The council are going to go away and think about or scope the piece of work that's necessary to look at how much of the South Coast need ought to be accommodated with reference to things like migration patterns, which Mr. Shadarivian, alluded to earlier. Also, I'm looking at, you know, that being consolidated into a housing requirement figure. And then we can talk tomorrow about the ability to deliver and what sort of contingency ought to be included within that. So we're looking at the requirement and then a contingency figure on top of that. I'm interested to know from that what, again, going back to your track record, you know, what is your rate of delivery? What is the rate at which sites have not come forward or have come forward in a different timescale from what you expected? So that we can look at that as a piece of evidence, build that into a housing resilience contingency. The other thing I want to look at tomorrow, which is extremely concerning, is your ability to maintain a 5-year housing supply, because the way I'm assuming that you didn't meet your HDT through no fault of your own, and therefore you're subject to a 20% buffer. Am I right on that? So that plus an element of the unmet need from earlier on in the plan period is being rolled forward will affect some of your first 5 years unless you step the requirement. And whilst there's an argument to say you shouldn't use the stepped requirement to neutralise the 20% buffer, nonetheless, I think we've got to look at things pragmatically here. You know, we've got to get a plan adopted that is sound, is capable of being delivered, and isn't going to go immediately out of date and be subject to the tilted balance because of being set up wrongly. All right. So again, I'm preempting things that are going to be talked about tomorrow, but there is an issue about bringing forward perhaps smaller, easily deliverable sites in the early plan period, but equally looking at building in delivery towards the mid to later part of the plan period as well. So that's a kind of taster for tomorrow. I'm going to bring this to a halt now. Are there any points that anybody wants to raise? Ms. Buden, yes?
Ms. Buden, sorry, from representing Crest Nicholson. It was just in terms of the council's last paragraph within their topic paper, and a bit more information would be appreciated, because it talks around allowing infrastructure and other mitigation to keep pace. Has just been raised. Horsham were extremely good at meeting their housing targets prior to COVID and prior to water neutrality, and we did in our statements to yourself and raise the point in the event of non-water neutrality, and I think the evidence does show that water neutrality, there was never an issue. The figures in terms of the abstraction rates and water neutrality, there never was an issue. It was unfortunate that it just took 4 years for that evidence to come to light. So I think with the point about infrastructure, what do the council mean by in terms of infrastructure keeping pace? Because if it's to do with higher growth, then actually the argument is that higher growth does deliver infrastructure. So I think there needs to be some further information from the council as to what they think the constraints are with infrastructure within the authority area that would limit growth to a lower level.
Are you here tomorrow?
I am.
Oh, good. Right. Well, you can say it all again tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much for persevering with what is actually, despite what Mr. Shadarivian said earlier, he said it was very simple. It's actually a complex subject, and I really... Oh, your response was simple. All right. So thank you for persevering with it. Thank you for all your contributions. And I think I look forward to seeing many of you again tomorrow. So thank you very much.